Before you start on a journey, you need to have a good idea of where you are going. Before we start this journey, let's take a good look at what we want to achieve. Here is our model, my original Huggy Bear, as I painted her a while ago. On this demonstration, I will use this baby as a model to help show how I paint realistic eyes as I create a reproduction of Huggy Bear. One of the things I always emphasize when I'm teaching eye painting is what I call the gaze technique. Note how Huggy Bear appears to be focusing on the camera as though she were gazing into our eyes. I achieve this look by the way I position the eyes. Huggy Bear is looking slightly to her left and focusing on a point that is fairly close to her. I like to paint babies focusing close in such a way that when I hold them in the crook of my right arm, their eyes seem to look into mine. This close focus also makes the most pleasing close-up photos. Here are a few photos I've collected of kids looking at the camera. See how one eye is centered and the other eye is turned in? Both eyes are focused on a point. This child is looking slightly to her right, and the right eye is taking the lead and focusing on something. The other eye must turn to follow the gaze of the right eye to focus on the same point. So this is how we will be painting Huggy Bear. Huggy Bear is looking slightly to the left. The other eye is turned in to follow the gaze of the left eye. Before I begin the painting demonstration, I want to show you a short clip from a video I made years ago. In it, I illustrate another point that is important to understand when painting babies. It seems that when a baby is born, his eyeballs are fully formed and the same size they will be when he is an adult. But of course, the rest of the face is small in relationship to the eyeballs, including the eye opening. In this illustration, you can compare the shapes of Portrait 1 and Annalisa. Irises appear quite large in relationship to the size of the eyes, and there's less white area visible. In addition, the eyes are set low in relationship to the opening. The effect is that the lower lid hides a good portion of the iris. So the part of the iris that is visible takes the shape of what I call the rising sun. The colors of the eyes are quite dark when the baby is born. Even the whites are rather dark and bluish. As the child grows, the colors often lighten, but the healthy child will have the rising sun look in his eyes for a time while he is small. Hello. Right now, I'd just like to briefly go over the basic supplies that I'm going to be using for painting Huggy Bear. I've gathered up all the main things that I'll need for this demonstration. Here are the paints, the Joe Sonia's artist colors that I'll be using. I think I have all the colors that I'll be needing. Painting babies' eyes doesn't require very many colors. Then I have the mediums, the retarder medium, and the clear glaze medium are the main ones I'll be using. Here's an assortment of brushes, some for mixing the paints and some for painting. I have acetone for cleaning the paint out of the brushes. And then I have have toothpicks, which are very useful, as you will see. And I keep an emery board handy to sharpen and shape the toothpicks. I have several palettes that I like to use. I have to keep the paints mixed to the proper consistency and also keep them from drying out. That's one of the challenges of air dry paints. One of the palettes I like to use is a ceramic watercolor palette that is easy to clean because it is highly glazed. It has these slanted beds so you can splash the thin watery paint up the slope. This is especially good for skin tone layering. This is a Stay Wet palette that is really useful for keeping the paints moist as you work. It has a sponge underneath a piece of acrylic paper. This paper is a very durable material for mixing your paints and storing them. And of course it has a lid to keep the paints covered when you're not painting. Sometimes I use this kind of palette, a flower-shaped palette, and here is a stackable type of ceramic palette. I like to have 2 or 3 containers of water handy for cleaning my brushes and thinning the paints. We'll use a lot of water in the paints as we go. And I always have paper towels handy. These can be used and reused. I always keep a thick stack of paper towels, most of them used with some dried paint. I constantly blot my brush on this stack as I paint. This is a tool I couldn't paint without. An optivisor, so I can see what I'm doing close up. It allows me to see minute details, and it also magnifies the work. This particular optivisor is called OptiSight. It comes with 3 lenses, number 3, 4, and number 5, the 5 being the strongest magnification. I often use the number 7, which is sold separately. I use the number 7 for painting really tiny details like the eyelashes on the little darling. These are the basic supplies. I'll go into more detail as we go along. I'll see you on the next segment. Here are the main colors that I'm going to be using in this demo to paint Huggy Bear's eyes. Most babies' eyes, in fact, maybe all babies' eyes, are a deep blue color, very dark, and the color I use mainly is called Payne's Gray, but it's not really gray, it's really a very dark blue. So that's the primary color that I use for painting babies' eyes. And then of course we have carbon black, burnt umber, and then for shading the whites, and for the whites of the eyes I use smoked pearl. I don't use a white because it's a bit too white. It doesn't look natural, and I think this is a very natural color for the whites of the eyes. And then I use antique green to give a little sort of a intermediate color between the light color, the smoked pearl, and the dark color, the shading on the the white part of the eyes, which I create the shadow colors with a mixture of Payne's Gray and burnt umber, and I also use a little bit of the antique green. This is my Stay Wet palette. It has very good for painting with acrylics. It has a sponge that's soaked with water, and the paper is, well, they call it acrylic paper, so it's not just normal paper. It doesn't tear easily or start to come apart when you scrub it with water. In fact, you can even use it and reuse it, rinse it off, and use it again for your palette. And the palette comes with several sheets of this acrylic paper and instructions on how to prepare the paper. You have to soak it in very hot water for 15 minutes, and then it's ready to use for your palette. So I've soaked this paper and it's ready, so I'm going to put some of my colors on the palette. All of the colors on the palette require mixing to thin the paint to a very fluid consistency. And sometimes I want an even more fluid consistency, depending on what stage I'm painting. So I usually try to water the paint down even more and keep it handy in a more fluid state by adding lots of water. I'm going to mix a gradation of colors that I'm going to be using when I start shading the whites of the eyes. I like to use umber and Payne's gray together to create a nice gray. And you can make the gray a little to the brown side or a little to the blue side. Depends on what you're doing. So these are the colors that I will be using when I shade the whites of the eyes in a little bit. I like to put my retarder medium in a separate container. If I can find my retarder medium, here it is. There's a little bit of that handy. Rather than mix the retarder with the paint, what I like to do is to condition the brush, clean the brush each time I'm getting ready to paint. I make sure the brush is clean and free of paint. And then I put some retarder medium into the brush, blot the brush, and then go into the paint. So this part of the brush has always got some retarder medium, and it keeps the paint from drying up in the top part of the brush. And the paint is at the tip where it's easy to control the amount of paint that you're putting on the piece when you're painting. When I first painted Huggy Bear, it was over a year ago, I just painted the way I always paint, according to my experience and my many years of painting eyes and baby's eyes. And I just did what comes naturally. But now that I want to recreate this face and I want to explain how I did that, I have to look at it a little more analytically. I need to show you how to focus the eyes, how I do that. So I took a photograph of Huggy Bear and I took a transparent piece of acetate and traced the outlines of the eye and then the outline of the pupil and the iris, so that you can really get an idea. As you're painting, it's really important to kind of visualize so that you get these arcs and the sections of the circle that are showing correct, so that they have the right curvature. And like I talked about in the little video clip about painting babies, their eyes, the irises are set low in the eye, giving that rising sun effect, so that more of the eye is below the lower lid than the part that is hidden in under the upper lid. And you can see that part of the pupil area, this large dark area, is actually underneath that lid. So we're going to paint it that way so that it's this shape cut off right here. And also I need to teach you about focusing the eyes. And what I often do in my eye painting classes is I have the students find the very center point from top to bottom and from side to side and plot that on the eye. And if I did that with this eye, the center point would be right about here. So the center of the pupil is just a little bit lower and a little bit in from the center. And this one is the center is just above the center point of the pupil. We're kind of going about this backwards, but that's what I would have you do to reproduce this particular expression. Find the center of both eyes, plot this point just below the center, and this one just a little bit over towards the nose and down. So that's what we're going to do when we start painting. And then we're going to try to create a circle that is equal distance. All the points on this circle are equal distance from this point. So sometimes doing these little lines helps to line everything up so that it's equal distance, so that this one actually crosses that line, and then this circle is equal distance from the center as well, and equal distance from the points along the pupil. Please take a minute to study the shapes of the irises, the pupils, and the whites of the eyes as I trace them, and also as they are in the photo.